All right, welcome everyone to our first TAA Q&A session. And tonight's session is we're featuring Eve Dembowski. So Eve, for everyone who doesn't know who you are, give everyone a wave.
Hello, I'm
So
me.
I was sort of on the fence about giving Eve an introduction tonight because that's sort of the whole point of tonight's program is getting to know Eve and a little bit more about her work as an astrologer and her place in our community. You know, a little bit more about the contribution that she makes to not just the craft of astrology, but to the craft of traditional astrology, which is what we're all in the room for. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Eve is one of our imports. And Eve, you've been living in Australia for quite some time now, right?
Yeah, probably longer than some people have been alive, I'm
Yeah.
sure, on this. I actually immigrated here in 1980.
Right,
So it's
yeah.
been actually 45 years, 46 years now. I think, what's the date today? It's the 20, oh my God. I arrived in Australia on the 22nd, 1980, 22nd of January.
Oh, wow.
There you
So
go.
Gee.
yeah, that's pretty spot on. Wow, interesting.
So,
Anyway.
why don't we, to get things rolling, why don't you just give us a little bit of insight into your journey with astrology, Eve? You know, what was it that brought you to astrology, and what has the journey been like for you?
Okay, very quickly, I probably became aware of astrology when I was about 11 years old. My father was, well, yeah, he was because he's no longer living. He was a professor of linguistics. His specialty was medieval Romance languages, particularly ancient French. And he had a colleague who did a similar thing, but in, I think, Portuguese was his specialty. And his name is Carl Wheaty, and he came to visit one year when I was about 11. And he had gotten fascinated by astrology and he was just yakking on about it. And he got this little book out and he worked out things, which I have to presume was ephemeris. And he told me a bunch of stuff that I do not recall. But I remember just being fascinated. It's like, what is this? And so, of course, life goes on. I'm a teenager. I'm a young person. I tried to teach myself astrology when I was in my early 20s through the what are those books that I can't remember the author, the Parker, um, whatever Parker books, which were like these workbooks and not.
Julia and Derek Parker.
Yeah, that's it. And I tried to teach myself, and then I had my first child, and I remember trying to work out these, just teach myself astrology with absolutely no success whatsoever. Fast forward a few years, and by the time I got into the mid 90s, I finally found out, hey, you can actually study astrology. You can go to a school and study. So I did. I studied at astrosynthesis, which is a very sort of modern, humanistic kind of a la Liz Green, I like to say, type of astrology. And I did that a couple years into my study. I mean, I loved it. I was just like, riveted from day one. And a couple years into it, I became aware of this thing called medieval astrology, which was through the work of Robert Zoller. And I started to dabble into that. This was really in the early days of the internet, probably at this point. We might have had a computer and the internet, but I had never really thought to go online and look up astrology. It was sort of at those days where it was still kind of a novelty. So I just eventually got a hold of a few books. And then when the internet became more of a thing, I started ordering books and studying on my own traditional astrology. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily medieval, it was all sorts of different things. Um, at one point, I read somewhere about horary, and I sort of chuckled to myself and went, what? Answering a question through astrology. That's silly. But I then went, I wonder what it's about and looked into it. And then I was kind of hooked. And eventually I did most of my study on my own with just a few friends. I wasn't actually studying with any teacher per se. And I did eventually meet Deborah through when we organized the regular traditional astrology conference down here in Melbourne back in 2009. And that's when I met Deborah because we brought her out and I started studying with Deborah. And a couple years later, she asked me if I'd be willing to um, teach the STA horary course, which I, of course, said yes. In the early days, it was pretty much here's all the material, make of it what you can and try and figure it out because it was all over the place. She'd only been teaching it as intensives. So she just had the various sessions and some charts, but often you'd have a chart and a judgment and you didn't know which chart it came from. So it was fun and games trying to work it out. She was not well for a number of years. And so she kind of stepped away. And when she came back, she revised all the work, all the material. So anyone who's done the course in the last sort of, I would say, since 2016, 15, 16, that's when it started to be the revised work. And now it's just become an amazing course. So I've been teaching that ever since. Um, and I mean, what else am I supposed to say?
No, it's good just
I'm not
hearing.
quite sure. I
It's
mean,
good
just,
hearing about your trajectory, and I mean, you've
yeah,
taken a journey that I think a lot of us take when we come to astrology. The
yeah,
most accessible door that's open to us is the modern side of
yeah,
things, and
absolutely.
I mean that's definitely a product of the age. I
Mm.
think modern astrology really reflects the contemporary worldview and values in a lot of ways. So just like if we sort of cut back to there, what was your experience of the modern side of astrology, and what was it exactly that led you to traditional? What was going through your mind when you went through that
Well,
transition?
I mean, I can remember quite well. So the astrosynthesis course had 2 years of like the beginning. So you'd go and you'd do this 2 year course. You'd learn all the basics. And I do very clearly remember they started with the signs, so you would learn about the elements and the signs and blah, blah, blah. And then you went to the planets and then, all the other stuff. And I mean, as a teacher now, I would say I would not start with the signs because to me, they are the most esoteric kind of aspect of astrology. You want to, give people a real sense of the pragmatic way that astrology kind of connects to us so that it becomes real. And I think for me, it was 2 years, near the end of the second year, I remember starting to feel this thing of being bored. And I remember thinking, how can I be bored? I love this. It can't be boring. I don't want this to be the case. And it was sort of around that time when I think I went to my first conference and there was all of these sparkly, colorful books at the book stall. I did buy a lot because I am a Sagittarian, so I did buy an awful lot of books. But there was this other stall that was I don't remember what it was, but they had these little A5 little booklets, and it was like these translations, and you'd open it up and there'd be like one paragraph and all the rest of it was notes, footnotes. And I remember just reading it and it talked about dignity. And it was at that conference I saw Rob Hand speaking about, he did a lecture on dignities and reception. I didn't understand anything. It was just went right over my head, but I thought I want to understand what this is about. I want to know this stuff. This seems like it was never talked about, and this is stuff from way back in the ancient times. And I thought I want to know this. It was that sense of there's something here that I certainly had not gotten any inkling of in what I was studying up until that point in the modern astrology. But I mean, at the same time, I will say I think that modern astrology has provided a lens that is valid in itself. It's just that it's not complete. In fact, it's a very narrow lens, but there are times when it is very valid to bring that in. So I'm glad that I have that modern astrological background. Um, though I would probably say that I use it, maybe like 5% of the time now.
Yeah,
So,
right. So,
So,
when you were in that camp, were you practicing as a modern astrologer there for a while, or did you open up consulting later?
well, what I did was I was actually a flower essence therapist before. So I was seeing clients as a flower essence therapist, and I started to look at their charts as I would see them. So they got the essence, but they would also get a little mini reading as far as what I could see. And I did famously have, I suppose I did start to put my shingles up as an astrologer for a little while. My kids were young, so I actually did a lot of children's charts at the time. So parents would come to me from the school, and they would ask me to, look at their child's chart and, learn about it. And of course, one of my first clients, they didn't actually know I don't know how they couldn't know, but they didn't actually know the exact time that their little son was born. And of course, they were born on a day that the sun ingressed into a different sign and the moon ingressed into a different sign. So I couldn't be sure of either the moon or the sun. And, so I just did it for noon and, hoped for the best.
Yeah.
So it's one of those situations that, we all find ourselves in at some point.
Yeah.
Interesting. I would
Like,
do it differently today, but at the time I had no tools other than well, let's just go with noon and see what happens. So
yeah.
yeah.
So what you described when you made this transition and you started studying a bit more traditional material, this
Mm,
was really exciting for you. Was it something that you were eager to dive into by the
yeah.
sounds of it?
Yeah.
Because there's something that I've detected in the wider community that all of our pathways of learning tend to be quite long these days. They're getting longer and longer, like we're getting 4-year programs, things like that. And people go through these processes, they come out the other end, and even though they're still quite intrigued by the other branches of astrology that they may not know about, or
Mm.
even some parts of the historical underpinning that they're not clear on, a lot of people get study fatigue, I feel. Like it's almost like people come to the end of a program and as much as they want to learn more, it's something where they almost feel beleaguered. So did you have any of that, or was it more that
Um,
you were exhilarated because you'd found something new?
well, I think what happened to me, I remember very clearly after I did the first 2 years, you could continue on and you could do these units and then eventually work to a diploma, which I did decide to do, but that's just my own, stubbornness. Like I start something, I want to finish it. And I mean, look, I think it was worthwhile doing, but while I was doing these years and working on this quote diploma, um, I'm saying that because we were supposed to write a thesis. And I mean, I know what a natural thesis is because I come from an academic family. This was not a thesis, it was just a little paper that you wrote. But I loved doing the research. I'm a little embarrassed about what my topic was. And I think about it now and I go, oh my God, I was just making up some of this stuff, which I think a lot of modern astrologers, particularly in the 19th century, having studied the history of astrology in the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th, what was considered good astrology was innovative astrology. In other words, new stuff. So people were very excited about anything that hadn't been actually written about or thought about. And they thought, this is good stuff. And the reason is because they didn't know about the tradition, or, they knew little bits, but there had been a real break in it. I find that fascinating now. But I remember at one point near, sort of maybe it was at the end of the 2 years, and the Brian Clark, who was one of the main teachers, put up a chart and said, okay, so here's a chart. Okay, what do you guys think? And I literally had no idea. I could look at that chart and say, oh, yeah, the moon is in, Aquarius and the sun is here and that's squaring that. But as far as what it meant, it astounded me that I really did not know. And I realized, well, we don't have a method, we don't have a methodology to enter into that chart. So they had a few discussions about, oh, well, some people like to start with the moon and others start with the ascendant. And then and I just thought that doesn't sound right to me. And what traditional astrology has is you start to learn that there's a way, if you want to know about the health of a person, you look at the first house, you look at the ruler of the first house, you look at their condition, you look at the sixth, that which might afflict the health of that person. And suddenly you have an idea of what kind of things they might, have to encounter in their lifetime. And there's a method, and it's clear, and you can actually enter into a chart and look at it and get information that is on a practical level, which I found modern astrology was great at describing. I don't know, your character or your basic psyche, but it doesn't tell you if you're going to get the job or not. It doesn't give you any hints about, if you're having money problems. It might say, oh, well, you've got Neptune in the second house. So, money is just, I mean, that doesn't help you on a practical level. And I thought, this has to be more practical because it's existed for thousands of years. And, 2000 years ago, people weren't talking about, the relationship with your father and how that might be causing you issues in your life. I mean, this is a very recent sort of thing. And so I thought, there's got to be more to it. And I found that, the more I went into the tradition, the more I started to see, in whether it was Hellenistic or medieval, or whether you're Masha Allah or, Ibn Ezra, whomever you are reading, you start to see a certain structure, and there are certain foundational things that are similar and that are based on, as Rob Hand said at that lecture I went to see, which I didn't understand, but he did say, if you want to know astrology, you're going to have to study Plato and Aristotle. And I was like, whoa. But actually, I think he was right. I think knowing the philosophical basis of this is just like, it opens it up. It it just, yeah, it just makes it come alive. And
Gives you a foundation.
yeah, I mean, it's just that the very fact, the difference between Plato, and I'm not an expert by any means, but Plato talked about the forms and the basically I could relate to that as a flower essence therapist. I was like, yeah, it's the essence of a thing. It's non-material, and it makes whatever is manifested what it is. And Aristotle was like, well, that's a little bit, it's all very airy-fairy, and he wanted to be more scientific. So, he was more into the hot, cold, dry, moist, and how it all balances out and how that will manifest in a certain way. And they're both correct, or they're both, important, and they both are in astrology. So, yeah, I do find it really fascinating.
Yeah. Do you feel, I mean, everyone has a different opinion about this and a different approach to astrology generally, but do you feel that there is a way in which modern astrology and traditional can complement each other, or do you feel that these are things that are better left
Yeah,
in
no, I
separate
think they
camps?
can. I think the difference, I mean, I think, look, I've been working more with traditional for so long now that maybe I've forgotten what it's like to not have those tools in my kit. I mean, I think there are certain, mm, actually thinking about it, like if someone's trying to do a horary chart and they haven't studied traditional and they're trying to do it from a modern perspective, they're just going to get confused.
Right.
Again, because I think what modern astrology tends to do is to just try and pull in everything. And so it becomes like a mishmash. Um, like, oh, what does, the sun square Mars means? Well, let's just take the Mars energy and the sun energy and kind of mish it up together. And it's, and we come up with something. Um, Whereas in traditional astrology, they look at it and say, well, what does Mars rule in this particular chart? Where is it in the chart? Is there any reception? I mean, if you know, Mars is receiving the sun, it's going to be a much easier square, because then, the sun presumably would be in Aries, or potentially be in Aries, so be exalted as well. So, you have this, you know, situation where if you have Mars in Capricorn and the Sun in Aries and they're making a square, well, that square is going to be very different to if there isn't reception and they're not essentially dignified. You have a much more difficult thing. So these are the subtleties that we can see in a chart, and oh, that's going to be really hard to deal with, or it's going to be actually, it might work really in a positive way because it puts a lot of energy. A square would energize something, but it would also work together. So um, I think that modern astrology lacks that ability to see those subtleties, and a lot of it would rely on the astrologer and the sensitivity and the wisdom of that astrologer. I mean, I've seen modern astrologers do amazing delineations, like Lynn Bell, for instance. I mean, I have a lot of respect for her. Um, so I do think that that's something that we have to respect those astrologers that have done the work, regardless of what kind of astrology they might practice. Because if they have the wisdom, then they can use it for really well. Um,
Yeah.
I also think, I mean, obviously, traditional astrologers didn't have the outer planets. I use the outer planets, but I don't give them the kind of focus that many modern astrologers might give them. I sort of see them as, a support or a reaffirming something that's already in the chart.
I think
I,
that you hit on an interesting topic that I think a lot of people would be interested to hear more about, because in the modern approach, the outer planets they have the same level of significance as the classical planets, and they have the same sort of impulse. How do you view them across charts? How do you tend to see them in natal charts versus horary charts, for instance?
Mm. Oh, that's an interesting question. I suppose, I mean, natal charts are, I mean, I think natal astrology is probably far more complex than horary or elections or even mundane, even though they say mundane is the ultimate. I mean, I think mundane's pretty meat and potatoes, really. You're just looking at ingress charts or solar returns of nations, but you're kind of reading them in a similar way. I think the problem or the complexity of natal chart is that it's a person and they have this life and they have you're sitting there and they have whatever experience they have. So there's certain things that are in the chart that are innately in the chart, but then you have to consider the context of their life and the experience they had, what age they are. So if I saw someone's chart and they have Neptune on the ascendant, well, that's innate in their chart. That's innate, or sorry, innate in them. So I would say to myself, well, they understand that energy. For someone for whom Neptune is, I don't know, not particularly configured, just somewhere out there in the chart, but not angular, not in its strong place. And they have a transit of Neptune, to their sun or something, it might really throw them much more than a person who's used to that energy. So I would look at it as a whole. I don't put as much emphasis on it unless the planet is angular, in which case I will take note. I have seen a lot of people with Pluto in the first house or angular, particularly on the ascendant, but sometimes not. And, they will have had a story of when they were born and they almost died. That kind of thing. It's almost like they came into the world and their first experience was one that almost took them into the underworld, so
Yeah.
you can sort of see that, and it might be relevant to sort of explore that with someone, or it may not be. And that would come from the training I had as a modern astrologer. As a classical or traditional astrologer, I'd be like, flu what?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I don't know about that planet, so I wouldn't know. But I mean, to me, they are relevant, but they don't signify anything specifically.
Mm.
So the whole concept of signification, whatever kind of astrology you're doing, certain planets take on a role, and they have several roles in a natal chart, many roles, but they take on a specific signification. I don't give those significations to the outer planets. I don't believe they signify anything in a horary chart. They won't signify something. They will modify or maybe emphasize something. So, like if you've got Pluto on the MC and someone's asking a question about a professional question, and you see Pluto there, well, this is, they're feeling really intense about this, or there's something really almost obsessive that comes into it. So that's describing something, but it doesn't signify it. You
Yeah.
walk the ruler and see what else is going on, but
Uh-huh.
it's adding a flavor to it. That's how I would work with them, which is
Yeah. It's, I think there's a lot of misconceptions for people who are not well schooled in traditional approaches. I think one of the things is that traditional astrologers don't use the outer planets at all. And as you're saying, you still incorporate them. And could you ever imagine not working with them?
um I mean, look, they're always in my charts. And just recently, I was speaking to someone who told me that, you know, uh, someone had mentioned, well, if you're not going to talk about something, don't put it in the chart. And I thought that was an interesting idea. But I mean, I, huh, I'm not sure how I would answer that. I mean, I could easily not have them in the chart
Yeah.
and still be able to make judgments on charts. But I guess I'm kind of used to seeing them there. So, I've kind of gotten a little bit fond of them.
Yeah.
And also I have learned, I did years ago, I did a little bit of research on the meaning of them because I couldn't understand why we attributed these meanings to them. And I just felt that it was just like someone had an idea, wrote it down, so somebody else quoted it, and then everybody just kind of started to agree, oh yeah, Pluto's about this and Neptune's about that. And it was Alan White who, in an interview, it was an American astrologer, quite a very, army guy, real pragmatic guy. And he said, if you want to understand what they mean, what you have to do is look at their discovery chart. And whatever planet rules the sign that they were discovered in is the key to what they mean, which means that Neptune was discovered conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So it is the sign that is ruled by Saturn, and it was actually at the same degree as Saturn in the discovery chart. Fascinating that actually Neptune and Saturn have a lot more in common than people would normally think. They would think they were the polar opposites, but there's a lot more similarities. In fact, in some of the ancient texts, Saturn was referred to as the Lord of Deception. Now, I think the reason was because he was malefic and he would deceive us. But I found that interesting that we often think of, Neptune as the one that is going to deceive us and, throw up these fantasies and we get, you know, um, led astray, or we don't know what the hell's going on. So anyway,
Yeah.
interesting. And
Interesting.
I could talk about them for hours, but we won't
Of
do that.
course.
We've
Yeah,
got a lot
yeah.
of other questions to get to.
Like so obviously as you mentioned, you are a teacher of the STA horary course and you've been a teacher for some time. Just thinking a little bit more about what some common misconceptions are when people are traditionally curious and wanting to open up more. Do you see any what am I searching for? Any consistent misconceptions that you come across? Do any spring to mind that are sort of universal by way of
I
say,
think I think the main misconception I've come across with people who've been doing modern astrology for a long time. There's a couple of colleagues who've been astrologers for a long time who do modern astrology who are very resistant to anything traditional that I know here in Melbourne. And a lot of times they're, I mean, the the criticism or the comment I hear is that, oh, well, traditional astrology, it's all black and white and it's just rules. Um, so, they don't see it as soulful as, modern astrology, which tends to, deal with the human experience and the processes that people go through. It's like the internal processes. And I think that, there certainly is something to be said that, this might be the case. Like I said, people like Lynn Bell, she does some amazing work on that level, but she works with people in a very different way than I would. And, so it has its place. But I think that's a real big misconception, this idea of black and white. And I say to people, you have no idea how much amazing, the magic that astrology reveals to you. And I'm not talking about astrological magic, which is a whole other thing, but just the magic moments that you have when you understand traditional astrology. To me, I look at it as, astrology really is a language, and we need to learn how to understand it. And once we do, the cosmos through the charts speak to us. We speak about that in a horary chart. What is it that speaks to us when we look at a chart? Sometimes it has nothing to do with the rules. I mean, you have to learn the rules. It's a bit like my husband's a musician. I trained as a musician originally. Forgot to say that. That's where I met him. But in music, you practice, you learn the theory, you know all of this, but you have to keep practicing, practicing. And then there comes a point where the music just comes through, and that might take years to get there, but when it does, you have this freedom, and you can break the rules, because the rules are just guidelines to keep you to understand what does it mean to have something that's in harmony as opposed to dissonant. And if something's dissonant, it's got to resolve. This is the theory, but once the music is just flowing through you, it goes where it goes. And I think it's the same with astrology. In fact, I see a lot of parallels between music and astrology.
What would you say to people who see traditional astrology as being limiting or predictive? That's often a word that people would say if they haven't come anywhere near it, they see traditional astrology as predictive. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, yes, you can predict. I remember at our first little thing, Joy was very clear about, yes, but we do predict. Yes, it's true. Um, and but hmm, I think to say it's only predictive is just not real. All you have to do is, I mean, William Lilly, who was a 16th century astrologer, very well known for his horary. If we read what's fascinating about his work is he's got a lot of charts that are there. And when you read his charts, you see the humanity that he had towards his clients. You read how he looked at a chart and it's very clear that, oh, this isn't going to happen. And then the client's all upset and they're crying. And so, I looked again at the chart to see if there was anything I could provide this person in order to help them out of the dilemma they found themselves in. So clearly, human beings have not just suddenly become conscientious of the fact that sometimes clients come to see us when they are needing some kind of guidance and support. It's just that the tools that traditional astrology provides us are so much more effective than modern astrology, in my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Yeah.
But I think that you can, if you've learned modern astrology, certainly that will, that will provide you some information. And it's not that it's wrong, it's just limited. And so adding the traditional, you know, you will start to open up. And it's just, I mean, I can't just sometimes it's a bit like watching a sunset and say, oh, that is the most beautiful thing. I don't know how to describe it. And that's how I feel about astrology, and the tradition and the reconnecting with the roots of our art. I mean, it is an art and we all practice it. And, we might use different tools, but, anyone who's here or listening is obviously, knows what I'm talking about. It's beyond what tools you're using. But when you're learning, I would very much suggest learning traditional because it does sort of free you in many ways, and it makes your astrology stronger and your connection to the superior beings, the cosmos, whatever it is. You start to feel that connection, and you start to feel it's not about you, it's about the cosmos, and you're just here as a conduit for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we have a bunch of questions that people have
Okay.
sent through.
Yeah.
So we might just sort of pivot a little bit and then we'll
Well,
sort of
there's
see how
there's
we go.
one that I'd like to answer right away.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so this was from Georgina. And she
Georgina. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and she goes, my question is, when will the next online horror course be held in Australia? So I am here to announce that as of yesterday, I had a long chat to Deborah, and the next online course, which will be Australian friendly, will be 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon in Melbourne, Sydney, which makes it 10 o'clock in Perth, which makes it 3 o'clock in Auckland, if I'm correct. It will be starting on the 27th of June. So you can, I mean, it'll take a while before all of the administrative work and stuff gets all done and you're able to register. But what I would love, if anybody's interested, they can I have to talk to you. Is there a place on the TAA where they can just write in and we
Well,
can start
yeah,
a
we'll
list?
put that up there. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, because it was as of yesterday. So it's all very early days. So anyone who's interested, that will be happening. I'm also planning earlier in the month of June to do a in-person intensive in Adelaide. So anyone who would like to experience it more as an in-person over 2 weekends, 5-day intensive, that will be in Adelaide. And so if somebody's is
Yeah,
around there and wants to do something like that, that will be happening. I don't have the exact dates yet. It'll either be the first two or the second two weekends of June. So I'm still having to sort out the venue and the timing as far as the venue. So those two things I can say in all confidence will be happening. So there,
that's
that's
exciting. It's more
yeah,
for
it
the
is.
Australian time zone.
Yeah,
Something that
and
we
it'll
don't see that often.
basically, yeah, rather than us having to, wake up at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or just listen to the recordings. We'll be able to do it all live if people want to. And yeah, so it should be fun. So
Yeah. Well, we'll
that
definitely
one,
make
I
sure that
can
we get more information for people and things like that as well.
absolutely.
So yeah, so Georgina, we can tick that box.
Yes,
Um, why don't we move on to Nico had a question.
yes.
Now I'll condense it here. I think Nico's on the call with us tonight.
I think I
Um,
did see his name. So
yeah, Nico, did you want to ask your question or did you want me to read it out?
I don't see. Oh, there he is. Oh, no, she is it? There.
Okay, I'll read it out here. So I'll just condense it a little bit. So Nico says that they're looking for a perspective on the hierarchy of essential dignities. I found plenty of resources and clear logic for using things like domicile, exaltation, triplicity, and the bounds, which are the Egyptian terms. However, I feel that the literature on the faces or decans is completely limited regarding practical application. So, how do you actually use the decans in a reading, Eve? And do you treat them purely as a minor dignity, or would you incorporate the specific imagery or myth of the Deccan into the chart synthesis?
Okay, that's a really great question. And I'll say two things. You are absolutely correct. There's less literature on the deacons, or sometimes referred to as the faces.
So
Um,
before we dive into it, do you want to just maybe briefly give a couple of lines to people who might not be
yeah,
familiar with what the Decans are?
absolutely. So first of all, a couple lines. If people are not aware of the essential dignities, this is a table of essential dignities, which are used in traditional astrology. There are 5 levels of essential dignity. Rulership, most people are aware of, and exaltation. Those two are, they're not really used in modern astrology, but they're referred to. Though they do give dignity to the outer planets, which no, you don't do that. They don't have outer, you don't do that. You just piss off Saturn and Mars if you do that, and you don't want to piss them off. They get very, very nasty when they're pissed off. Um, and then you have the triplicities, which are there's 3 of them, and it has to do with the elements. And there's a day ruler, a night ruler, and a mixed ruler, and they are the same planets for all of the signs in the same element. So the same 3, fire, etc. I use those a lot. The term dignities are another what do you call it? A division of each sign. in 5 parts, but unequal parts. It has a lot of interesting, and it's a very ancient thing. There are a couple of different terms or bound. There's the Egyptian and the Ptolemaic, and some people argue, the Ptolemaic are better. No, 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 it's the Egyptian. They work better. My view is it makes no difference as long as you keep using the same one. And there's a lot of interesting things about the terms. The sun and moon do not have any rulership by term of any degree in the zodiac. And then you have the decans or faces, and they are an equal 10-degree division of each of the signs. So you end up with 36 of them. They are considered, quote, a minor dignity. And the more dignity a planet has, the more it was understood to be able to express its true and the best aspect of its nature. So, if Mars is very dignified, Mars will do Mars well. So if he needs to kill, because that's part of Mars's job, it will be done in a fell swoop, very cleanly. You're not going to feel it. If Mars is in debility, has no essential dignity, he will kill you with 1,000 little paper cuts, and you're going to suffer terribly. So that's just a kind of an easy sort of, and maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek way to understand the difference between a planet in dignity and a planet, in debility or having no dignity whatsoever. Now, the faces, the decans, they were considered a minor dignity, and they are connected in my understanding. And I'm sure, Nico, from your question, you have done some research on this. So you've probably read more about it than I have. But I think Austin Kopok has done a wonderful job with his book, which I don't know if it's still in print, called The 36 Faces. And I had it right here because I was going to mention it, but now I can't find where I've put it. Anyway. Oh, here it is. This is the book for anyone who may have seen it. I mean, I do think it's a really good book. And at the back, he's got an appendix where he talks about the imagery, because the decans were associated, from my understanding historically, they came from the Egyptian, who had this idea that the year was divided into these 36 10-day periods, and each one was defined by a particular fixed star that rose at that time of the year. And that fixed star was associated with a particular god. And that they all had these different characteristics. And from that, there was like this imagery of that. Over the centuries, this, went into the Arabic tradition and various others. And these images, they're almost like, if someone's ever read the Sabian symbols, there's something similar, like the way the imagery is written. You have some, buildings in Italy and stuff, rich people had built these villas, and you see the villa is decorated, and you suddenly look at it and you go, well, these are the decans, that the images of the decans, a woman in a red dress, with only one leg or no legs, riding a horse, I think is the first or second decan of Aries. So there is a lot of imagery, and obviously it's used in astrological magic, which I do not practice myself, so it's not something I can talk about with any knowledge. But how I would use it in practice, I use it as a minor dignity, but I have found, like, I do a lot of horary, and one of the things that I have found, and it has been reaffirmed many, many times now, where if a planet is signifying, say, your client, say it's, I don't know, it doesn't make a difference, a planet, whichever planet, let's say the moon, and the moon only has dignity by a face. So it doesn't have rulership or exaltation, triplicity, obviously it wouldn't have term, but it has face. To me, that's a clear sign that whatever's going on for this person, they're very anxious about it. So Lily talks about the idea of a planet being in face, being like a man who is in his seat, but he's about to get kicked out. He's about to lose everything. So there's anxiety if that's the case. So I have found that to be really a reliable thing, but that's when it only has face. If there's other dignity, that kind of uh, that just adds to the dignity. It doesn't specifically give us anything. So that's about the only thing I will say as a specific thing. Now, in a natal chart, I probably wouldn't emphasize that as much. I might note it, but the nature and context of a natal chart is that that person is going to keep living and the chart is going to keep, changing. Do you know what I mean? Whereas a horror, you're looking at this one moment and you want to know what is happening right now and what's the next thing that's going to happen that's going to answer our question, or give guidance to what is potentially going to come next. But it's a very focused moment, whereas the natal chart is a whole life. So there's a lot that can happen in that life. I mean, I've probably noticed in natal charts, the people that seem to have the hardest time in life are those that have all their planets in their own sign. They have all these dignified planets, but there's no reception between them. So they can have a difficult time or they seem to be able to have a difficult time. Whereas you have some people that have these really difficult charts. If it was a horror, you'd go, oh God, this is definitely a no. But they end up being quite successful because they work really hard. It's almost like they have to make the effort. So I'm not sure, Nico, if that really answers. I know that you were looking for what might, I don't know if there's anybody else on the call that might have an idea of how they would work with the decans of faces that they might, want to share. That's probably the way I would do it. And I have to say, after the fact, I've made judgments. And then after the fact, I've gone, I wonder what, I've gone to Austin's book and I've just looked up the decan of, say, a particular, I don't know, the ascendant or the significator of, the client or whatever it was, just to see what the imagery is. And sometimes it's amazingly, I don't know, it really seems to relate. And I find that fascinating, because that's part of the mystery of astrology. You do something and there's layers that just seem to come together, even if you haven't, you know, they just kind of do. It's a little bit like working with the lunar mansions, which is something that I've only do sometimes. I've only started to really look at them in a more, you know, uh, sort of like, well, what is that? And that, there are images and what it might be related to. And after the fact, I will look at what lunar mansion. It's mainly in elections, and I'll look at, well, what is the lunar mansion of the moon in this particular chart? Does it relate? Does it support what I'm trying to do here? And very often it does. So,
I
yeah.
think what you touch on here, Eve, is you recommending to have a set of techniques that you employ in your interpretation
Mm.
and leave some out, or is the idea that you're not throwing everything in the kitchen sink at one interpretation, you're picking what works for you?
Yeah. And I think that, I think one of the most important things to remember is that, once you start studying astrology, my God, you can get overwhelmed with how many, if you go online and you go, you'll have one site that'll give you 20 million asteroids and, say, this asteroid means this and this one, look up your asteroids and you end up with all these asteroids. And, I mean, sure, it might be interesting to kind of look at it, but then it can also be overwhelming. And I would recommend first understanding what the 7 classic planets are doing, what they are presenting us with. And once you have that, okay, maybe you can add more things, but I don't think they're going to give you any new information. they're just going to reaffirm what the seven classic planets already are telling us, because you've also got the angles and the houses and where they are. So it's not just the planets, it's a whole bunch. How do they relate to each other? I mean, I think reception is incredibly important. I think in horary and in elections, or astrology of the moment, the synodic cycles of the planets is incredibly important. Maybe a little bit less so in natal charts, because it might be interesting to note them, but like I said, the natal chart is the whole life. So it's going to move on. If you see someone when they're 40, yes, they have this natal chart that's the basic blueprint of their life, and there's certain things that are fundamental to them. But then they've had 40 years of experience and 40 years of, whatever has happened to them that has shaped them. And we might be able to see from their chart that they would have done it hard or have done it more easily. But now we're looking at what's happening now to them. So we would be looking at a solar return or a progress chart or whatever things that we might use. Joy will be talking about the Fidarias, I believe, in a month's time.
Yep.
So looking at the overall, the planetary period that a person is in, and how is that planet in the chart. So it's a little bit different with natal charts. Am I making sense, or am I just?
Yeah, that's making sense.
I hope I'm not
Pam
doing a
has
Trump and just weaving.
Pam has just tacked a question onto this. If working with decans, is it easier to use a whole house system?
No, no. Who asked
No.
that? Was that?
Pam just dropped that in the chat box.
Okay, all
Um,
right, yeah, no. I mean,
it-
I think it makes no difference, because you're just looking at the degree that the planet is in, or whichever, if you're looking at a planet or an angle. I mean, just generally speaking, I don't want to go too much on my high horse, but I think that, a whole house system is not actually a house system. It's just the signs.
mm.
Um,
But
Houses
as
are,
a degree based zodiac oriented system with the decans, you could effectively use that with any house system.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you're just looking at a particular degree. So like I have 21 degree Leo rising. So that would be the third decan of Leo, which I can't remember what is ruled. Okay, and that's ruled by Mars.
Mm.
So I would say, well, okay, my ascendant has Mars as the decan ruler. It's one thing I actually just had a thought about, is that the association of the decans with the planets came much later. So the decans were associated with, a fixed star and slash God, which had an image. And so I'm not sure at what point, I think it was during the Hellenistic period, they, because of course we know that the precession of the sky, and so the different fixed stars were of course slipping, and it wouldn't take too long for it to slip, so that 10 degrees, particularly that they only had 360 degrees and therefore 360 days. So you had this slippage that was happening, and they kept having to revise the I guess the timing and the dates of these decans. Um, and so at one point when things were sort of codified, I would imagine when, and I'm not sure here, so don't quote me, when the tropical zodiac was kind of in Western astrology, was like by the time Ptolemy came, he said the tropical zodiac is the way to go, as opposed to the sidereal zodiac that follows the fixed stars, and therefore it is about, I don't know, 40 some degrees difference now. So I would imagine that was probably the time when they started to associate a planet, um, rather than this image to the decans. And Nico's written to everyone. What did you say? I
There's a
couldn't.
perhaps it's sufficient to use it only in conjunction with heliacal risings or fixed stars without paying excessive attention.
Yeah, if that, look, if you are using those, like the heliacal rising, which is something that I would look at in a natal chart, but I probably wouldn't be looking at in a horary chart. Um, Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the way to work with them. But I mean, my advice is don't sweat it too much. Just work with charts. I mean, that's why horary is such a wonderful way to learn astrology generally, because you're working with charts and you have a reasonably immediate um, result, so you make a judgment and then you can, in a timely manner, you can know whether you really just went off somewhere and totally missed it. And I will say that I can almost guarantee anyone who has studied horary will not go that far off. They just won't. You know, Most people will do pretty good, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more detail you might get from a particular chart. Uh, but
That's a really interesting point. I've not thought about it that way before. That because where you've got the expansiveness of the natal horoscope,
mm,
sometimes it can be difficult to see which facets of interpretation are really going to be
mm,
striking. Whereas in a horary chart, because it is obviously more finite, you can see things working in a shorter time frame. That's a really interesting way of looking at
yeah.
it.
And I
I'll
mean,
just,
yeah,
sorry.
keep going. No, no,
I
keep
was just
going.
going to say, for anyone who may want to look at that book, I've just dropped into the chat a little while ago a link to Austin's website where he
Yeah.
sells that book.
Okay.
It appears to be out of stock, but you can bookmark that and have a look at that down the road. Our next question comes from Janet, and we have it here in several questions.
Yep.
So I'll just break them up, Janet. The firstly, she says, it may be useful to start with this one. Are the houses interpreted differently in horary, and in what ways?
You mean as
Uh,
differently as to in natal charts?
In natal
Um,
charts. So this is one part of a few questions that have to do with
okay.
horary. So if I'm interpreting that correctly, Janet,
Mm.
the houses interpreted differently in horary, and in what ways?
I would say that the thing about horary is you have a very specific context. So, if somebody is asking about a disease, they're not feeling well, and they want to know, is should I go see the doctor? Is this serious? Should I take this seriously or something? So it's a medical health kind of question. Well, the eighth house, which, we can look at the house of loss, could be the house of death, but it's also the house of chronic conditions. So it suddenly can take on a slightly different um, meaning because of the context of the question. If somebody was asking a question that had more to do with money, then the eighth house could be debt or, loss of money. So it's obviously going to have a different context. So that's, the context will give it slightly, it's the same house. All those significations are uh, connected to that house, but you're going to be looking at it from the context of the question.
So it
And
narrows
I,
I
the
suppose it's
scope.
the other way around, because I'm sort of fairly familiar with horary,
yeah,
but I was more interested, whereas I'm not so familiar with a traditional natal
natal. Okay.
approach.
Yeah.
And so I was interested to know whether the question, like the houses, um, are slightly different under natal because
Natal.
there's some quite interesting sort of specific things around horary. For example,
Mm,
the fourth house is sort of like the root of the can be seen
the
as the
matter.
root
Yeah.
of the problem.
Yeah.
And whereas I think a natal chart wouldn't so you wouldn't be saying, well, the root of the problem
Yeah.
for you is
But
in the fourth house.
yeah, but it's, I mean, look, I think they mean the same. So like the fourth house in a natal context is your roots. So it would be your family, specifically father, but it could be both parents, but it could be specifically father if for some reason you wanted to know something separate about the mother, if that makes sense. So mother would get 10th house,
Mm.
even in a natal chart, if for some reason, like if I'm looking in a natal chart just, I pulled up a natal chart, I don't know anything about this person. I've never met them yet. And I could look at, if there's an afflicted fourth house, I might say, okay, they might have had a rough, time in the family. There might have been conflict in the family. But I could also look at, the ruler of the 10th and the ruler of the fourth, and it could tell me something roughly about how was mother as opposed to how was father. So in some ways, there isn't really that much difference. It's just the context, rather than different meaning. I suppose, like even like the 12th house, which, modern astrologers love to talk about the 12th house. It's like Plutonic, or no, Neptunian. We don't know it. But, I often think the 12th house is hidden things, it's hidden enemies. So in a horary context, if, the seventh ruler is in there, you could say, oh, there's somebody trying to hurt the client, behind their backs. But in a natal chart, that could be that, they're the person themselves are, their own worst enemy. They might be doing something and what's the word when you're not facing up to fact, you're not facing up to what's happening. You're not being honest to yourself. You're, as a modern speak, you're unconscious of, you're doing things unconsciously. And this is why it's connected to addiction, which is an unconscious thing where we become trapped, imprisoned, which is, of course, a 12th house signification as well. So I mean, I would, anyone who wants to jump in here and give their 2 cents worth about how they see the difference, if at all. I don't see that they mean differently. I just think the context of how we are interpreting them is different. That's how I would think it.
The other components of Janet's question, did you want to ask them, Janet, or do you want me to read them out?
I haven't got them in front of me.
Oh, that's
So
okay.
I've
So
got them
great.
here, yeah. So there was one about the role of the moon in a natal chart and how interpretation differs from horary.
Yeah.
And that's good. And I sort of thought about it and I went, oh, well, let me see. And I guess, again, I think it's a context. Obviously, in a horary chart, the moon, for those of you who don't do horary, it is kind of it can be a general significator or secondary significator for the querent, which is the person asking the question, but it can also be a general significator for the thing that is being asked about, particularly in missing objects or missing pets, because pets wander and the moon wanders. So the moon, often people that first come to horary get very confused because they want, like, it just should mean one thing. But in fact, the moon can mean several things at the same time. And the best way to deal with it is to look at it from one perspective, then wipe the slate clean, and then look at it from another perspective. And that, makes it easier to think. In a natal chart, I mean, obviously the moon and sun are probably the two most important planets in the natal chart. And then you have the moon, sun, the ascendant, those three, and that combination of those brings you to the part of fortune, which was considered a very important point. And they also looked at this other point, which was the prenatal lunation, be it a full or a new moon. And they considered those were the 5 most important points, degrees in the chart. So obviously the role of the moon, I think, in a natal chart is probably really important. And particularly if someone is born at night, the moon would be the main light and would have a lot more emphasis. But aside from that, I personally think the moon in any chart is just so important. Where is it going? Where is it been? Where has it been? What phase is it in? In a natal chart, that might be a much more important thing to look at regarding the client, if they're a new moon person or balsamic moon or first quarter and a full moon. It's going to give you some clues, I guess you could say, as to, I mean, to speak in a modern way, why they're here, what is their purpose? Obviously the sign that the natal moon is in is going to be incredibly important to how a person looks after themselves. That is something I learned from modern astrology, and I think it is very valid. It's a very valid point. A person with a moon in Aries is more likely to, when there's a problem, they're just going to want to take action or go off, go for a run, do something, depending again where that moon is in the chart and how it's configured. But it might be someone who's much more likely to just want to take an action without thinking, rather than say someone who's got a moon in Cancer or in Pisces, where they might just feel everything and need to sit with that feeling and just stew in it for a while. And moon in Aries would not want to do that. Moon in Capricorn's another one. I'm married to one, so I know that very well. They have to, they need to fix things, so that it really has a much stronger, I think, it has a lot more say about the nature of the person whose natal chart we're looking at, how they deal with life, what's their first way that, if things are getting stressful, how do they act? What's the best thing to make them feel better? And for everybody it's different, so that's just goes to prove that there isn't one way. There's lots of ways to deal with problems. Some might be healthier than others, but and I'm sure that there are many moon in Pisces conjunct Neptune that, reach for the bottle. It might not be as healthy as making a list and ticking off what you need to do, which a moon in Capricorn might do. I don't know if that's really answered your question.
No, that's good. That's great. Yeah. No, that's very helpful.
What about the combustion piece, Eve? The combustion in a natal chart?
Yeah, I don't think combustion in a natal chart is nearly as destructive as in a horary chart. One, because it will pass. Whatever is combust is going to progress away, and that's going to go. I mean, recently we've had this Sun, Mars, Venus, and Mercury all kind of conjunct the sun in Capricorn. And I looked at this because I've had a few hories, and I look at it, and as a hoary, you're looking at this and you're going, well, there's a lot that's invisible. We can't see what's going on. We have to wait until these planets move, or the sun moves far enough away that they start to come into their own light. Even if it's just from a symbolic perspective, not real time, but even just symbolically, how many degrees does this have to separate? But if I did look at it and I thought to myself, well, if you had a child born, and there would be many born with this, that were born in the last month or so, obviously it depends on where in the chart all of that would be. But I do wonder to myself if this is the case where maybe it'll take them a little bit longer to know themselves. Potentially, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I do know that I've noticed in natal charts, people that have the ruler of the ascendant, which is a very important planet, in the eighth house, not making an aspect to the ascendant. So in conjunct to the ascendant. So in a sign that doesn't see the ascendant, or they have their sun in the eighth house. That often, these are people that might go, they might be perfectly happy, go through life, and then suddenly at the age of 25, 30, 35, suddenly go, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know why I decided to go to law school and become a lawyer. I hate this. I don't want to be a lawyer. I actually want to do something else. Why am I doing this? It's almost like they didn't know themselves and they just kind of worked. I'm just looking. Oh, yes, your granddaughter. Oh, Jenny had a new granddaughter, so she's got Mars and Mercury in combustion. Well, she might keep that anger in check because it's all in. Is it all in Capricorn, or has it gone into the sun? Is the sun?
No, in Capricorn.
Okay, good. So that then it's a little bit better.
Luckily, the Mars is exalted.
Yeah. You know what? She's going to be gorgeous and beautiful, and she's going to have a grandmother that will be able to guide her through all those astrological pitfalls that she might encounter along the way. Gorgeous thing.
While we're on Jenny, Jenny had a question here as well.
Yeah.
What's the significance of a planet that's out of bounds?
Oh, that's an interesting one. And that's interesting, Jenny, because I haven't actually looked. No, I did look at that at one point. I looked at my son's, not my son with the dot, but my son, S-O-N. And he has, I believe, like 3 planets out of bounds, and I can't remember the planets, but I know that some of them, maybe 2 of them were either Mercury, Venus, and Mars. I think out of them were some of those. And I think the third one might have been one of the outer planets, which are, I think, particularly Pluto is often, is it Pluto? It's often, I can't remember. Anyway, but I've often wondered about it because there is a sense when you're looking at a chart, if it's an event chart, an ingress chart, you'd look at planets out of bounds and you'd think, okay, there's something that isn't where it's supposed to be. So there's something it might act in a way that is unexpected, almost like Uranus, like sort of like we're not quite sure how it's going to, because it's not on its right road. In a natal chart, I wonder if it just allows people to go their own way. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not so anxious about staying within that narrow confines that they, as a child or as a teenager, you think, you have to be a certain way. Maybe, and I don't have enough experience to say for sure, but the possibility is that, you would think maybe people with, particularly if they're like the moon or the inner planets, that they are able to step outside the norm and be okay with that, you know, walk their own walk. And again, this is just what it is symbolically suggesting to me. I don't have enough charts that I can look at and say, I've looked at all these charts and this is the characteristics of all these people and they have out of bound planets. I can't do that. I haven't done that kind of research. My brain isn't Virgonian enough. So I will leave that to Lee Lim and people like that who can, look at a gazillion charts and conclude something. It just feels like that's what it is. That they
Oh, that gives me some food for thought. I don't really even look at them in horary, never
Mm,
mind natal, but
yeah.
simply because I have not learned enough about
Yeah.
planets being out of bound in order to be able to
Understand what it might be.
utilize it
Yeah.
accurately in a consultation.
I mean, I think that's one of those things where I think if we have the basics, we can do judgments really well and we can get very accurate information. And then you get little details like is this planet out of bounds or not? That to me that's kind of like starting to get into the icing on the cake and maybe the little sparkles that we can add. And so it's not necessary to know, and in fact, I think you can do a lot more with less information, but knowing that, having a real understanding of it, a deep understanding of the 7 main planets and how they're connecting together and all of that. That's going to give you your basic judgment. The rest of the stuff is just going to maybe add a little bit extra descriptive or just support what you've already seen in the chart. So, that idea of adding more is going to give you more information. It won't give you more. It'll just reiterate what's already there.
Yeah.
But just from a natal perspective, I think that an out of bound, particularly someone that has many planets out of bounds. And I mean, I can only speak from my son, who I know very well. And I would say that he was never worried about, or he seemed to not be worried about the expectations. He just did his own thing. And his teachers would say, oh, yeah, he's pretty much his own, but also he's an Aries, so was it the Aries that made him just go his own way? But I don't know, so there were many things that created this person. And he became who he became, and that's part of his thing where he's not that fussed about being fashionable or being, keeping up with the Joneses, any of that kind of stuff. So potentially that's what out of bound planets in a natal chart might reveal.
Thank you. We
Yeah.
do have another one here from Felicity who asks
Thanks, Eve.
how you see astrology operating in the rise of AI.
Oh God.
Can I
Oh,
just clarify that for you, Eve? I was
Yeah.
talking to an evolutionary astrologer, and they were saying, "Oh, look, hurry's so easy. You just put it in the chat, a chat GTP, and it gives you the answer." And I was like going, "Oh, so what about all the rules?" So that's the question I'm asking. How we're talking about all the rules and reception, all the rest of it. I haven't explored it, but that's a real concern.
Well, I mean, my understanding of AI and chat GPT, particularly, first of all, it's been found to be wrong many times. I mean, people write and they go, oh, this was wrong. Of course it's going to be wrong because it's just the whole of the internet, and it's just coming up in almost instantaneously with an answer. So it's taking all of that. And there is a lot of rubbish out there about astrology on the internet. I mean, there's some great sites that are, have valuable information, but I think there's just a lot of garbage out there. It looks good, sparkly, nice little graphics, and it's like your moon is in this, this is the time for you to, it's just bullshit. I'm sorry. But I mean, it really is. And so, I mean, AI, I think, is just, I think I'm hoping that there will be, the in generations to come, that people will be like, there are certain things that I don't think artificial intelligence can ever do. They can get the facts, maybe, and if the input is a lot of wrong facts, they're going to get things wrong. But I don't know that they can get I don't even know what it's called, but there is, like, as an astrologer, you learn that, working, and I know there's several here that do a lot of work. And so I know that I'm not speaking to total newbies. But you study astrology, you work with it, you look at many charts, and there's a point where the chart speaks to you. They're not going to speak to AI. They're not going to, because AI doesn't have that kind of, I mean, excuse my lingo, that soul connection to the planets and to the stars.
Well, that's what I was trying to explain, what horror is to someone that hasn't studied it, but is an astrologer, is that it talks to you. It's a divination.
Yeah.
You sit there and you feel there's an intuition that comes very strongly into that.
Yeah.
But then, they put this thing in and then they get this, might be bullshit, whatever, but it's enough for them without actually seeing the chart. And, I just think, oh, like, and it's really giving people the wrong impression of what, horror is. Anyway, so it's just probably a forward, I'm just thinking of the future because it's going to affect astrologers. And in traditional astrology, it's very much an ancient technique. Anyway, I'm just curious as to what you thought the
I mean,
views.
yeah, I guess none of us really know. I mean, we're all astrologers and we're supposed to be able to predict the future, but none of us really know how it's going to pan out. But I mean, I would see it very much like my husband's a composer, he writes music. And, he said now, people can just say, I want something that sounds like, and they get a little ditty and they can use it, for their little film or their little clip because, YouTube, whatever they're doing. So they're not actually buying library music or paying to use a piece of music, you know. So I mean, it's impacting on his ability to make money. And you know, we were talking about it, and it's like, well, yeah, it's changing. Do you know what I mean? But there will come a point where AI is not going to be able to generate something that's really going to have the kind of impact. Like if it's just for the, you know, like a little YouTube clip, you know, of somebody sewing or something. I mean, I watch a lot of YouTube clips of people sewing, and sometimes I turn the music off because it's annoying. Do you know what I mean? But they're not going to be able to do like a full film score. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they might, but it's not going to have whatever.
Oh, it's being tried among the knitting communities. The amount of pictures
Mm,
that are generated by AI and the amount of people that ask, oh, is there a pattern for that?
yeah,
And I can spot it a mile away the inaccuracies of
yeah. And I think that,
the supposed construction of the pattern that they apparently have done. And
mm.
oh,
So,
I'll just be happy to see the whole thing implode personally.
yeah. So I do think that anything creative, so like knitting patterns or music or astrology, because I think astrology is an art, um, you know, AI is not really going to survive. I think. I mean, eventually people, you know, if somebody wants to go online and, you know, they go up into some site and, you know, it looks all nice and pretty and there's lots of colors and they, oh, I want to look up my, you know, my horoscope, you know, so, oh, you know, I'm an Aquarius and this is telling me I'm going to have a great year. Oh, this is great. I love it, you know, and, but they're not really serious about, you know, they just, it's kind of like a bit of fun for them. And, you know, maybe someone will find it a bit of fun and eventually will want to know more and, you know, be guided somehow, you know, fall upon a site like Skyscript and go, what the hell? Oh my God, this is much more complicated than I thought. What's this about? And they'll want to know.
Mhm.
And then they'll study it. But then a lot of people may not. And so they'll be happy with the AI stuff. And then they'll tell all their friends that astrology is a lot of crap because the AI didn't work and it was the wrong answer. I
I
don't
think if we hark back to Janet's question earlier and your answer about the houses, that
know.
they have multiple layers of meaning that are dependent on the context. And
Mm,
at least at this stage, I think where it comes to something like AI, it doesn't have that level of discernment
mm.
to find the right layer of meaning or the
Yeah,
the right niche, perhaps, to approach a chart from. Uh, is a thought that comes to mind, and you sort of raised that when you answered Janet's question.
yeah. And the other thing interesting, I mean, I think anyone who sees um, clients will be the first to say that you will attract clients to yourself that somehow their charts, even the horary charts, connects to your own, you know, and it's almost like it's very interesting, you know, like I've had recently all these clients, well, not all, but you know, a bunch of clients that have come and they all have a Pisces signature in the natal chart that plugs into my moon, you know, and it's really interesting. I just had another one. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Oh, there's the Pisces again, you know. So is it something I need to look at? You know, I mean, because there's one thing I've been thinking is that, you know, when you're looking at a horary chart, there are certain, for those of, I apologize for those who are not, um, don't understand horary and would say, if you want to know more, do the course. But there are considerations that are in a chart that might be things that are warning you or making you aware of certain things. And some of those considerations are actually warning the astrologer that they might get it wrong. So I've been sort of thinking to myself, can we take that a bit further? Do we get certain clients that are presenting with certain, I guess, issues in their lives, and somehow there's something that we need to look at as well. I mean, it's just something that I've been thinking over the last few sort of months, that concept of why do we get the clients that we get?
Mm.
Is there more? Is it a two-way street? That yes, we might be able to provide them with something, but are they providing us with something, even if it's just a mirror? So, it's food for thought.
Fascinating subject matter. Well, I think that's the end of our questions. So unless anyone else has any other questions, feel free to pop it in the chat box.
Yeah, there's one question that Janet
Yeah.
asked about, do you use Regiomontanus house system
Mhm.
charts? And I would like to I would say, I'm not going to say a big thing about house systems, except don't use whole signs. Just use a quadrant of some sort. And it doesn't make any difference which one you use, as long as you use the same one across everything you do. So I now just use Regiomontanus on all my charts. Now, that probably is simply because after studying Lily, he uses Regiomontanus, so I started doing my houris in Regiomontanus. I had been doing my natal charts in Placidus because that's what I learned with my first teachers. So I didn't really question it. There was, I just did. And I just got to a point where I suddenly went, you know what? I'm tired of switching. So I stopped switching and I just did everything in Regiomontanus. And what I found was, once you do that, you start to see these connections that occur with like the cusp degrees that are just mind-boggling. And if you're swapping different house systems, you lose that connection. Now, that doesn't mean it only happens with Regiomontanus. I believe Jenny uses Placidus. She does her hoary charts in Placidus. And she would be getting those same kind of connections. Whatever house system, as long as it's a quadrant system that divides the ascendant MC, however it divides the in between houses, and you stick to that one system across everything you do, I think is the way to go. So to me, that's a really.
Well, I did have a go at different house systems, including Regiomontanus. But I remember that when I first was learning to do astrology and hand calculating the charts,
Yeah.
that was using the Placidus tables. So
Yeah.
I was more familiar with that
So you just
than
kept going.
anything else.
And look, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, I think the idea of people arguing about which house system is the correct one, it's like, as long as it's a quadrant system, I think they're all valid. The problem, I think, with the whole signs has become very, very popular, particularly in the US, with the rise of Hellenistic. And I do think that, and this is my opinion, so don't quote me, but it's my opinion.
Where it might become a problem, from what I understand, is if you're trying to do a chart for someone who lives in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be a
That's where a
problem.
different system would apply.
Yeah, but I would then be using a equal house system rather than a whole sign system. So
Yeah.
because you're going to get a degree of the ascendant, and then you just give that degree across all of the houses. I know we had a student on the course a few years back, and she was in Alaska, way up in, like, I don't know, like she lived, was it 60? I mean, it was really up north. And basically in the summer, like, the sun just pretty much just kind of dipped and then went back up. And in the winter, it was just dark for pretty much 22 hours, and it would just come up a little bit around on the horizon and fall down. So obviously for her to use Regiomontanus or any of the quadrant systems was like really difficult, because she'd end up with, like, 4 signs intercepted, and all of this. And I remember she asked, and Deborah answered as well. And I sort of felt, well, probably in that case, I would try using maybe equal house system, just to make it easier to read a chart and see how that goes, because you're going to end up with the ascendant and the descendant are still going to be 180 degrees away from each other.
Mm.
And then obviously you're going to have an MC. Well, that's going to be skewered way one way or the other, and maybe you're just going to have to use that as a point that might be important. If a planet is on that, I would still think it would be important. But you'd probably need to just work around it, but I would not use a whole sign system because it sort of negates the ascendant. And those are very few and far between, people that live at those extremes latitudes, but there are some, and the astrology does kind of start falling apart at that point, no matter what you're doing, you know. It's interesting. I'm sure that there's someone who can do a big study on it and come up with have insights, but I haven't done it. So I don't
No,
know.
great insights, Eve. And thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who sent through questions as well.
Yeah,
That
thank
was
you.
all really interesting, generated some interesting discussion. So I hope we were able to tick those boxes. Eve, you've already mentioned a little bit about what you have coming up, but this is a busy year for you, right? What do you have on the agenda?
Well, I have those two horary courses that I'm going to do. I was looking at the dates and thinking, oh, because I wrote a traditional natal course, which I call the Foundations of Astrology. And I was just trying to find the dates, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm running out of dates to do it. So the other thing I'm thinking is I could probably do it, but it would have to be on not on a weekend, because my weekends are getting gobbled up very quickly. So I am still just trying to work out the schedule for that. But if I do it, it would probably be earlier, so like maybe even starting in March, which is a little bit quick, but hopefully the last couple times I ran the course, I just did it online on Zoom, and I had about 4 students in the course. So I'm going to be putting that together, and hopefully if I can get the dates to work, I will put it out there. It's about it's over 10 weeks. And it's just like, if you're interested in looking at natal astrology from a traditional perspective, there would be some of the material which, if you've done the horary course, would be a repetition, but it would be applying it to a natal chart, which is slightly different. What does it mean to have a planet that's in essential dignity in a horary chart is quite different, or the emphasis on that is different to having a natal planet that is essentially dignified or debilitated, whatnot. So it's just looking at those and exploring it. So yeah, I
So you've got the
started.
natal course, and then we're looking at a horary course that you're running, and then you're talking at UAC as well, right?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. So I will be, yes. And that's the other reason it's a little bit difficult. So I've got two, like at the beginning of April, I'm doing, Jenny, you'll be jealous. I'm doing this it's called Design Boot Camp at the Australian Quilting Convention, which is a 4-day thing with this woman. So I'm looking forward to that. So I will just put astrology aside, and I will just be stitching away and playing with color and fabric. So that's 4 days. So I can't do anything that week. I can't do anything. Can't do anything the week of UAC. So yeah. So yes, I am speaking at UAC, which is kind of fun. I mean, I guess. I don't know. I've heard of someone who was speaking at UAC, and she said only one person showed up to her lecture because there's about 15 lectures happening at any one time. So I don't know whoever shows up, shows up. I'll have fun anyway.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sure to let everyone know about the horary course that's coming
Yep.
up. Let me just quickly, before we wrap up, let me just share something with everyone, just so everyone has a bit of an idea of the things that we have coming up. So I'm just sharing my screen there if everyone can see it. So just so everyone knows what's on the agenda for upcoming TAA talks. So something that we haven't talked about Eve yet is that Eve's actually going to run our next presentation, which will be on the art of electional astrology. So for anyone who is not familiar with electional astrology and using charts to elect an auspicious moment to undertake an endeavor or begin a project, Eve's going to be giving a presentation on the sort of things that you need to be considering when looking at an electional chart. We then have, so that's coming up on the 5th of February. In March, we have a relationship horary session with Chris Svensson from South Australia. And he's looking at relationship horrors and some of the considerations that you need to take into account when you're looking at charts of a romantic nature. So that's going to be quite juicy for anyone who may not be that familiar with the way that you would approach a chart necessarily. What sort of nuances you'd be looking for in the chart when you're helping somebody negotiate their way through what is probably a bumpy relationship passage. If they're coming to you as an astrologer, it's because something's wrong usually. So Chris is going to dive in and have a look at what sorts of things we need to look at in those charts. And then very exciting in April, we have Joy delivering a talk on Fidaria and the way that it shapes our experience of life. So for anyone who's not that familiar with Fidaria or doesn't employ it in their natal work, as from what I understand, Joy predominantly works with natal charts. So for anyone who is interested in traditional natal astrology, that's definitely one that you don't want to miss, as Joy will illuminate and expand our minds. So that's all very exciting. So
yeah, I think
stay
I'm
tuned on
really
that
looking
front.
forward to that one because she's
Yeah,
a wonderful presenter and yeah, so very, very knowledgeable. So that'll be great.
yeah. And we're all looking forward to electional astrology, Eve. So
Yeah, learn to find the right time to do something.
yes, absolutely. So thank you for everyone for coming along. And if anyone hasn't joined up as an affiliate to the site, just jump on, become a member with us, or as we call it, an affiliate, as we don't charge any membership fees. So just make sure you're on the list to be notified if you wanted to hear about anything that's upcoming. And we will talk to everyone soon.
Yeah. And thank you very much, everybody. I hope I didn't over talk anyway, whatever.
No,
No,
that
it was
was a
great.
really good presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, and if
Thank you.
anybody's interested in any of the courses, just maybe
Check
just
back
to
to the
make
TAA site in the next week or so,
yeah, and
and we'll
that way
have
we
some
can start to
information up
collect
there.
some names and emails and spread the word about, the TAA, spread the word about traditional well, astrology generally, but like the roots, spread the word that our roots are really important and very interesting. So thank you everyone for being here and thank you, Josh, for asking me. Okay.
You're very welcome. Well, have a good night, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.